Hello there, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be a bit weird. I'm looking at a new film and a very old film, so I'm really going between the trial of the Chicago 7, which is a new film shown on Netflix. It's made by Columbia and sold to Netflix called The Coronavirus Outbreak, and you couldn't get released in cinemas. And I'm comparing it to Batman Returns, a comic book adaptation from the 1990s, and asking what one is the most socially relevant one. Because I come to a different conclusion than most people would, right? Basically, the trial of the Chicago 7 is based on historical facts made last year for a big Oscar-worthy release. It was meant to be directed by Spielberg, but Aaron Sorkin, who wrote it, took over when Spielberg dropped out, and he directed it because he directed Molly's Game a few years ago, which I quite enjoyed. But I enjoyed the same way I enjoyed this one, where it's a case of they're entertaining films, but they're not top level. I mean, Sorkin did better by actually having good directors direct his scripts. If you look at the Social Network, what Fincher did, I mean, even go back to A Few Good Men, what Rob Reiner did. He tends to get better served by directors. He's a writer, and sometimes he's, like a lot of writers who move in direction, he can sometimes fall in love with his own dialogue in a way that means you get 10 minutes more footage than you need, or 20 minutes more footage than you need. Molly's Game suffered from that pretty badly. There's way too much dialogue that it should have just been cut that wasn't. And it kind of sometimes didn't get to the point, or had this obscure point that they really wanted to get to that wasn't really the point that people were needing from the film. And this one suffers from that as well. But it's not as bad as that, actually. I think I enjoyed this one more than Molly's Game. But it suffers a bit from the thing of you're taking a really complicated issue and you're trying your best to put it out there, like what happened and what the important points were. But because it's only 2 hours long, or 2:10, you're losing so much. And the weird thing was, what happened after this, I found more interesting than what happened during it. It's like when you find out what happened to all the characters, if you see at the end of the stories about what happened to them all, and then you read up on what happened to them all, it's like, that's more interesting than what happened to them in Chicago 7. Their lives are more interesting than this incident. So that's the one big thing, because some of them stayed pure to their ideals, to their socialist ideals, and some of them really didn't. And it's interesting to see which ones did, which ones didn't, and it's just it shows how complicated life is. And in this one, they're trying to show how complicated a political instinct can be, which is a good idea. I mean, it's like there's lots of ways you can take this. And I think for dramatization, they took the right approach was, instead of going so far into the Nixon government, which they only get at the beginning just to set it up, it's really about these 7 people plus Bobby Seale, who was a Black Panther who got dragged into this. They're dealing with the variety of the obstacles these 7 face with each other as well as with the country. And that clarifies a lot. Plus you get more with the lawyer, you're more with Bobby Seale and Black Panthers. So that's enough for you to cover. So that's good, that cuts it down. But it still feels like it should have been a 7-part miniseries. It still feels like there's massive problems that you have 2 characters who are part of the 7 who get about 5 lines between them. And the other 2 get let off and don't get charged, ultimately don't get in. They get through the trial, but they don't get found non guilty. And they get 5 lines, and it's like, you just feel that's just bad dramatization. I mean, they set them up in a clever way, like, you're the ones that are going to let off so they can hang us, basically. But it feels kind of, it's not satisfying. Really, you just know that's a red done a trick, and it's not a satisfying trick. What the film does well is it shows you what in the past, before we had social media and before we had all this, stuff online that's now getting utterly destroyed by censorship in every possible way, is like how easy it was for the people to the government to manipulate and say these people are bad and try and get people thrown in jail for a long time. How easy it was for them to obfuscate all their nefarious deeds just for political gain, which they still try and do, but it's harder to do now because people can come up and say, well, what about this fact, what about that fact, and doing videos on it and stuff like that. It's much harder for somebody to do that. So that's what it shows as what it was like before. But it still goes on. I mean, look at the world, it still goes on. I mean, we look at Trump and Biden campaign going on right now. They're giving two complete liars. Both sides. It's like, if you're in America and you try to vote, you're giving a choice between two liars. You know, it's like the Biden stuff, there's so much corruption with him. It's the same with Hillary. And Trump, everyone knows, you know, the stuff in his, you know, past and present probably, who knows, that is kind of dodgy. And it's like, well, it's a liar versus liar. And it's like, this all stuff still goes on. And people are really distrustful of everybody, like they were in the 60s, which this film shows. People being distrustful. The youth been getting to the point where they don't trust anybody. I mean, that's one thing film shows is the fact is, why do these problems start? The problems start is the youth don't trust the right wing. Well, that's obvious. That's normal. That's normal behaviour. I mean, no one in the past, that's just normal for every generation. They do not trust older people. They think they're cold-hearted bastards. That's just typical. But they don't even trust their side as well. Just the same way nowadays, if you ask someone who's actually on the left, do you trust your people, like in the Labour Party or the Democrat Party, they would say, no, they're liars. They're corporate cheats. They do not care. They're just less horrible than the other lot, but they're still horrible. You know, and that's what creates frustration. That's what creates the riots and the need to go and riot just down the streets, because people, it's not that partially to do with someone like Trump, who is an abomination, is horrible, is everything people say about him. He is that. He is awful. But if you had someone going against him, people think had a chance, and who wasn't awful, there would be a lot less anger. But there's panic, there's anger, just the same way there is now. And all these riots took place then because the left were actually picketing their own party to say this is wrong. And it's like, it was basically a party at war with itself, because just the way it is now, I mean, the corporate Democrats and the left wing of America at the moment are at war with each other. I mean, Trump just stays at the side sometimes and just lets them fight. You know, they should be getting together and getting the scumbag, but they won't, because they're too busy fighting each other. That's what happens there as well. And that's what the film shows, is the idea that people are fractured. It's like they don't trust their institutions. And that's what the film's about, because you've got Tom Hayden, played by Eddie Redmayne, is the more logical one. He's the one who works from the inside and is trying to push change from the inside, because he thinks that's the only way to really succeed, to get the middle ground people to go along with you. And he thinks the left, as shown by Abby Hoffman, played by Sacha Baron Cohen, and his group, are hippies, they're drug addicts, they're making everyone look bad. Because whenever anyone sees them, they think that's what the entire left is. And that's what you get nowadays now, because you look at anyone who's like centre left, when you look at someone like AOC, is like, she's a nut. That's what they think, she's a nut. We're not that. And they look at the lefties like AOC, look at the Democrats who are more centrist, look at, they're Republicans. I mean, really, I'm centre left, British centre left. I look at the Democrats as Republicans, you know, just generally. So you've got that kind of split, and that's what the film shows. is a split. That's what he's best at, is like Tom Hayden versus Abby Hoffman. And you get two good performances. Eddie Redmayne has to be simple rather than a lot of ticks. I like Eddie Redmayne doing his always ticks, but this quite nice to see him do something simple for a change. And Sacha Baron Cohen has to tone it down as well here to play a guy who is eccentric, but he has a political point. And ultimately you find out that Hoffman and Hayden, actually, even though they fight a lot, they actually agree a lot, they do have respect for each other. It's just they have two different approaches to how to do it. But ultimately they are more closer than they think they are. And Hayden is more violent than he thinks he is, and Hoffman's more rational than people think he is. But it leads to the thing is, all this is done well, but that's just one part of a big problem in that time. That something like Vietnam War Ken Burns documentary did so much better because he had like 10 hours to show you the details of all the problems. In this film, there's so many complications within the Republicans who are pushing forward this case. Like the character played by Justin Gordon-Levitt gets a bit complex at the beginning, a bit complex in the middle, but generally isn't given enough where you think there's something complicated here. You actually look at how does like the more conservative part of the country look at these people. You don't really get enough of that. You get the idea that Abby Hoffman doesn't take it personally that this guy's trying to prosecute him because it's his job. That's interesting, but you never get enough detail about that either. You don't get quite enough about the lawyer played by his name's gone from me. It was a BFG. He's in all the Spielberg films. You don't get enough of him. You don't get enough of Bobby Seale, who's in there and he's not allowed to talk, and you really feel you need more of him. He's really well acted by an actor whose name I'm not even trying to pronounce because I'll butcher it. And it's like, I want more of him. When you're watching the film and you're only getting a little bit. And the idea is you've only seen so much because they're treating him the way the court treated him, but you can need more. You know that Black Panthers are much more complicated and you're not getting enough. And you need more about the backgrounds of people and what happened to them afterwards, the complexity of what happened afterwards. So the big problem is, it's a well-meaning film, but it simplifies everything so much because it's based on facts that it becomes unsatisfying because, like, there's more here. This should have been a mini-series. Really. It really should have. There's just too much complexity that is covered by a one-liner or 2 or 3 lines that doesn't really satisfy you. And one of the big problems is Aaron Sorkin's a better writer as a director, and you get the feeling that an experienced director would have gotten even deeper performances that would have made the lines feel more complicated. Where here the line delivery is for the lines, for the writer of hearing the lines. Sometimes it's not, but sometimes you can feel that in it as well, and it's a flaw when writers direct. I mean, some writers are a bit more throwaway. I mean, someone like Shane Black, who's a writer, a well-known writer of films who became a director, he's a lot less precious, and his films don't quite feel that way. Sometimes they're a bit too writerly, but generally, in his better films, you get a sense of he's curbing that instinct a lot in a way that Sorkin hasn't quite got the hang of yet. But it's still a good enough film. It's just not a great film. The reason I bring up Batman Returns is this is a silly comic book movie that's actually a lot more about what's going on just now than Trial of the Chicago 7 in a weird way. Because you've got like the Me Too movement's covered with Catwoman. Because her story, I just watched the film again. Her story is a woman who's oppressed by her boss, who he kills, which could be a metaphor for rape as well. She comes back angry and is trying to get revenge on him, but she's also got a lot of psychosexual instincts have been blossomed, they've been suppressed or suddenly exploding. She's dealing with Batman, who's this other guy who's also got the same weird kinks as she's got. So it's a bit complexity of trauma for those two. And that seems much more like now. The complexity of trauma is much more like what we've got and dealing with now. How people are suppressing things and not able to deal with anything. It's like, oh god. Then you've got the Penguin, who's this little guy who's thrown away because he looks like a freak. Which is a facial metaphor. if you're looking at the way some people look at anyone who's different from them. And he goes to the underclasses and is basically starting a revolution. He gets corrupted by Max Schreck, who's the the top business guy says, "Look, I can make you mayor because you've got the working classes behind you because they are all fed up as well." And he also knows that Penguin's got a criminal enterprise too, so he's corruptible. So they end up using violence to shake up the faith in the establishment. Have you noticed we've got the Proud Boys and we've got Antifa? A right wing and left wing violent sect who are causing so much trauma for everybody who kind of don't know what way to look. And in the middle of it, the utter scumbags, which is basically Max Schreck in the film and Donald Trump and the Republicans and probably some of the Democrats too, the rich ones who are making a mint out of all of this trauma just now. While everyone else yells at each other, they're making a fortune, and it's like, that's so cynical but so much now. And it's all about this whole idea of people rising up and it being sold back to them, and how everybody's just been traumatised. Everyone's working through their traumas. How, like, the Penguin is basically someone who's traumatised as a child, who's never got over it. A lot of childish feelings and a lot of violent feelings, and his view of dealing with women are really questionable. Really, really questionable. You know, and he's horny as hell and weird, and it's like, doesn't that sound like a lot of men that you've met in your life? And you've the other one, you get like we get this Batman. He's like traumatized as well, but he's a decent side of it, but he's still kind of messed up and weird. And you've got Max Schreck, who's a total scumbag, who is basically Donald Trump in this film. And it was basically Donald Trump in the 90s as well, because it's basically like a Donald Trump figure. It's like, it still holds true. And it's just like, God, there's so much going in this film that is now. I mean, they always try to throw in, like, all the Nolan films had lots and lots of social integrity because they were dealing with all these social issues. But it's like, well, that's nothing in this one. This one really is very politically aware. But it's also aware it's playing around with all these ideas within a not so reputable genre. Which is what happens in horror films and comedies and everything else, where you can say so much more than you could in a respectful film because no one's paying attention. And that's why this film's better than this Trial of Cheryl 7. Because this one, they know they've got jokes about penguin armies, and they've got little weird kinks and stuff going on there that makes everything, oh, that's not a kid's film. Well, they've got Batman blowing people up, and they've got trauma everywhere. And this is a film that traumatised the children when they saw it. Like, the children knew something was going on in this film. This was dark. And you have the Penguin being a total psycho throughout. And he's a total psycho whether he's going for political power or if he's starting a revolution. And it's just a bit of emotion of rage and how it affects you and how it pushes you towards stuff that's creating more trauma for you and everyone else, and how it's just a society just getting weirder and weirder and more messed up, and how the powerful just sit back and count the money while everyone else burns. And it just is this feeling of rage and trauma that is so now, and it's so much better than any kind of respectable version of this kind of thing, because it covers everything. It gets into a lot of detail without talking about too much about the trauma of someone who's been assaulted by their boss, and how it will affect them in ways that are self-destructive, and the ways that are empowering in their mind as they fight back against it. And it's how it destroys their relationship with other people, though. Because, I mean, Selena in this film, if she hadn't dealt with that thing with her boss, and she'd met Bruce Wayne, she'd been fine. But this thing just destroyed her. And the Bruce Wayne thing is, he was destroyed by childhood trauma, and he's still not right. And Penguin's the same way. The only person who's not traumatised is Max Schreck, who causes trauma. He's even got an idiot son, just like Joe Biden and Donald Trump. You know, he was the idiot son trope. So this film is just so much fun. And it is just so much more about the kind of rage you feel just now watching the world go insane, and how there's nothing you can do to sort it because all the choices are corrupt. And this film feels like that. Well, Chicago 7 is like, yeah, it's corrupt, and that's it. There's nothing. It doesn't go into the complexities of weirdness enough, and it just kind of is just too respectable for its own good. So I think John was the best way to go if you want to deal with some of these things, because you might get a more good emotional response about what's going on rather than a apparently more cultured response, but it doesn't really hit the urge you need. It doesn't really do anything for you to actually make you kind of what you're actually feeling about the situation. I hope that makes sense. I'll be back with another video soon, but that's me for now in this subject. Right, bye.